You're watching World Insight. We'll be back after this. Welcome back. This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has just ended her 5-day trip to Singapore and Vietnam yesterday, the second foreign trip since she took office. It's meant to bolster U.S. ties with its key allies in Southeast Asia, and some argue to counter China's influence in the region. Harris called the Indo-Pacific critically important to the nation's security and prosperity, and criticized Beijing's activities in the region as, quote, coercion and intimidation. However, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin hit back by rebuking the U.S. hasty exit in Afghanistan, saying the action shows the U.S. jeopardized credibility among its allies. Here's what he said, quote, the U.S. can wantonly smear, suppress, coerce, and bully other countries for the sake of America first without paying any price. It always tries to defend its selfishness and bullying and hegemonic actions by citing rules and order. But how many people would actually buy it? End of quote. You can see the exchange of rhetorics from both sides. So how to interpret Harris' visit to Singapore and Vietnam, a deteriorating U.S.-China ties? Let's loop in our panelists once again. For U.S. Vice President Harris' trip to Singapore and Vietnam, in Washington, Surab Gupta, who is a senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist with the Institute for China-American Studies. In Beijing, Huang Jing, Dean of the Institute of International and Regional Studies from Beijing Language and Culture University. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. How much impact will the VP's visit to the two countries have on the two's policies toward the U.S. and toward China? Mr. Gupta.
The U.S. has been missing in Southeast Asia, and even Mr. Biden has not spoken to the leaders of Southeast Asian nations. So by having the defense secretary there, having Ms. Harris out there, it projects a certain degree of commitment and reassurance to U.S. Southeast Asia relations. And this is important, and this has to be done by every administration. And the Trump administration did not do so. So I think this is a welcome visit.
A welcome visit to what extent, Professor Huang, your perspective?
United States are way behind, for example, countries like China or even Japan in terms of economic exchanges. Ever since Obama administration, United States has not paid much attention to ASEAN, which actually is very important. A single visit by Ms. Harris will not make it up. Number two, I think the United States has realized relationship with ASEAN member countries is not even. It's actually selective. For example, United States does not have a very good relationship with countries like Myanmar, Indonesia, Malaysia. It just emphasized on your allies like Philippines, or the new friends like Vietnam, or quasi-allies of Singapore were not enough to make up the shortage in the relationship between the United States and ASEAN. Last but not the least, talk about respect. We know that Ms. Harris just visited the kind of memorial place to memorize Senator John McCain, but that shows America's ignorance as well as arrogance. Ignorance is that that memorial was built to memorize, not John McCain, but memorize hundreds, if not thousands, Vietnamese killed by American bombers. And John McCain was just one of them that killed hundreds of Hanoi people in 22 flights. And number two is that if that's the case, you go there to memorize John McCain, that's an insult. And especially on the birthday of anti-American hero, General Vo Nguyen Gap. And I think that, I don't know who is her advisor. This is a very bad move. Shows that the kind of ignorance and actually arrogance of the United States. I think all of that in details tells us this visit, of course, is very important, but I do not believe they can achieve what the wishes for.
Mr. Gupta, on that specific incident, there were a lot of coverage in the international press. And in China, too, people are watching it and saying, what's going on there? What about the sensitivity of the issue, the lives lost in Vietnam during the war, does the American VP feel aware of that?
Unfortunately, it is for the most part internal politics, because she would not have chosen to go about her actions in the way that she did if she was a little bit more thoughtful. I understand Defense Secretary was there, and the Defense Secretary is talking about all the Agent Orange issues, and that's been a perennial issue. But Vietnam has suffered a lot. And considering that what we are seeing today in Kabul reminds us about Vietnam and what the Americans did in terms of the bombings and potential war crimes also, there is an active war crimes inquiry happening with regard to what happened by coalition forces in Afghanistan. And then having this complete dismissive attitude for its own rulers whom it was supporting in these states, in South Vietnam, in Afghanistan, there is a real tone deafness to American policy in that regard. I read both Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's speech, I have Kamala Harris's speech, and frankly, these could have been read out by Joe Biden and by Ash Carter in 2016. And suppose I did not know who the author was, I might have guessed it was that. So if we are seeing a certain reversion to a more stable American approach to Southeast Asia, I think that is something everybody in the Indo-Pacific would be relatively happy about.
Professor Huang, on that point, we see not only details like this, there are many other bigger issues that whether the U.S. has clarified with countries that the VP visited, for example, in Singapore, for example, in Vietnam. How is the U.S. going to deal with China?
I think that, yes, I think the VP Harris visit in Singapore and Vietnam missed a big point. Several of them. Number one, that the entire ASEAN as an international organization and its member countries has repeatedly emphasized that they don't want to take side in the U.S.-China competition, number one. Number two, they want to promote further economic integration because it's essential for the regional economic development, and also want to maintain stability despite territory dispute in the South China Sea area. And number three, they don't want to be enemy of China. In other words, China is very important, not only for regional stability and peace, but also for regional economic development. As a matter of fact, the entire region, including South China Sea, has been quite peaceful and stable and prosperous in the past 10 years without much kind of so-called intervention or involvement of United States.
Mr. Gupta, that's a very interesting question because we have seen over the past half a year, different administration officials from the Biden administration going to Southeast Asia. And it seems that it's the same message being delivered, how bad China is, how coercive China has acted, and therefore please with us, Indo-Pacific, under the American strategy. But the question really is, why would those messages being repeated if they haven't worked earlier?
Yeah, my response to that would be that United States policy is so wedded on some of these points with regard to the South China Sea and with regard to larger competition with China, including competition with regard to things like the Belt and Road investments in China, that the United States feels that it needs to at least touch on these as talking points to at least suggest that it is not departing or moving away from that policy stance. So they try to maintain that policy stance as a foundation. What they do need is a correlation of forces within ASEAN leaning more towards the US, because ASEAN is the balancing power in the Indo-Pacific region. And I think they get that much, but they are so wedded to those talking points that begins to alarm. Of course, it alarms China, but it alarms most of the Southeast countries that their grievances are being commandeered by the US to serve US interests and not their development interests. And the US needs to find a way around this. And that will take time, unfortunately.
Following what you have just said, also touch on China. If the US is not persuasive enough to its to the neighbors in the Asia-Pacific. What about China, Mr. Gupta?
Yeah, from the U.S. perspective, the U.S. perspective on China is that, yes, China's military, economic, and diplomatic influence is increasing, but not all of that is increasing in a positive way. And that creates a lot of insecurity and anxieties among the peers, especially because they have these outstanding maritime rights and even sovereignty disputes that are outstanding. The sense that China is seen as a little bit of a bully in the neighborhood is widespread in America, and that's why that talk continually of how they're going to resist China's law breaking, et cetera, which is exaggerated, of course. But that's the reason that narrative is put forth. And I think in that, on those lines, it would be good to see real progress on that code of conduct, because it will be a deliverable which can be shown to one and all that there is real progress on a very contested issue.
Professor Huang.
I think that China and the countries in the region have to understand, including China, the entire region has been developing very fast. Development means change. In other words, there are a lot of challenges created or brought about by all those changes. So China itself should be patient first. And those issues like territory dispute and so on and so forth will be there for us for a long time. But for one point, China have to emphasize, that is, China is for peace. I don't think China wants any persuasive power. China doesn't want to persuade anyone. China wants to talk with each one, consult and communicate and coordinate with everyone in terms of development and security as equal members. China itself will serve China's interest to maintain a peaceful environment, just like everybody else. China should tell others, we all want peace and stability. We all want development. So therefore, let's work together.
It's a very resourceful discussion both of you gentlemen just did. Thank you so much for your contribution. Surab Gupta, Huang Jing, thank you.